What happens when you believe and are convinced that you're right, but then it turns out maybe you're not so right after all? Hi, this is Barry Phillips, a 10-minute tour, day 3 of Qorach, Balded 1. We are still in Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter number 16. Let's go down to verse number 16. And it says, Then Moshe said to Qorach, Tomorrow you and all your company shall be there before Yahweh, you and they and Aaron, and each one take his fire holder or censer, fire pan, and you shall put incense on it, and let each one bring his fire holder before Yahweh, 250 fire holders. Yes, 250. You and Aaron, and each one with his fire holder. So each one took his fire holder and put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tent of appointment with Moshe and Aaron. Qorach assembled all the congregation against them at the door of the tent of appointment. Then the esteem of Yahweh appeared to all the congregation. Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from the midst of this congregation, let me consume them in a moment. They fell on their faces and said, O Elohim of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, are you wroth with all the congregation? Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the congregation, say, Move away from around the tents of Qorach, Dathan, and Abiram. After you read something like that, basically the only thing you can say is, uh-oh. Qorach was absolutely convinced that he had a legitimate argument. He had rehearsed this argument in the hearing of so many people so long that it must be true. He had an axe to grind. He had an offense, a chip on his shoulder. He was angry. He was miffed. And out of this anger and resentment and sense of needing revenge and affirmation and acceptance as being right, he separated people to himself. He has a righteous and just cause in his estimation. The idea, the spirit, the personality of Qorach didn't die out with Qorach. It has continued in the body of Messiah off and on throughout the history of those who were called Israel, through the history of those that are of the church. We see various individuals standing up, initiating a just cause, a righteous cause, only to get upset about some issue and turn off to one side or the other and cause people to follow after them. And as I'm saying that, Martin Luther comes to mind. Certainly he had a just cause in calling out the travesties of what was accepted religiously in his day, nailing his statements to the door of the church and drawing a line in the sand and saying, God help me, here I stand. Later on, he became very much an anti-Semite and railed and raged against the Jewish people. His cause took a turn, and he has certainly gathered many after him. He is one among a long list of such individuals. Time will not permit me to go any further than that. However, we still see currently in our body, in social media, it pops up frequently, we'll put it that way, where someone has a particular slant viewpoint, doctrine, and it is based on the fact that I'm right because they're wrong. It could be that both parties are wrong. And do we ever stop and think about that? When one says, well, it's either A or B, I've chosen A, therefore all who choose B are wrong because I'm right. We see this currently played out. Well, I won't go into that, but there are some very divisive things that should have been settled and have been settled for years, and now they're popping back up again. And there are some named individuals that are a part of it. Don't get in the middle of all of that, especially when it's very little benefit one side or the other. Follow Messiah. Follow the heart of Messiah. There are too many wounded people, hurting people. Too many folks are struggling in a lot of different ways in their lives who need some security, some stability, some wise counsel, some compassion, some advice, sometimes some correction to get their lives back on track. There is much, much more fruit to be had in caregiving and life-giving than trying to argue over stuff. 250 men. Now, when you think about this, 250 men are all vying for the same position, that is the high priest, Kohen HaGadol. Yah has already established and chosen Aaron, the brother of Moshe, or at least as these rebels are stating, so Moshe says. But none of us have heard Yah affirm Aaron. And maybe they point out the fact that Aaron's two oldest sons, Nadav and Abihu, died on the day of his inauguration. Therefore, there must be something amiss about this choice of Aaron. So maybe he's not the high priest after all. Well, his two sons died because they transgressed the set apartness of Yah, but Aaron did not transgress. He made offerings, and fire fell from heaven. So that to me would suggest maybe he is the right choice. These guys did not agree. When you can't look at the obvious and call it the obvious and see the obvious hand of Yah in favor of something because you disagree, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable and dangerous position. 250 plus men, 250 with Aaron and then Qorach, are all standing before the door of the tent of a meeting. They have their censers. The smoke is billowing up, and out of the smoke, the fire of Yah strikes. And when it's all cleared, only Aaron is standing there with his censer. I've imagined this many times. Aaron standing there trying to be focused on what he's doing, not being offended at the men that are challenging him, aware and cognizant of the fact I'm standing before the Most High. Let me focus on the Most High. Let me keep my mind where it needs to be. And there's a sudden flash of fire, and it goes by him, but not on him. And he looks around, and there are all these dead people. When it comes to Yah doing things his way and requiring that we line up with him, with his heart, his purpose, his plan, and his way, he doesn't play around. If we go over to the book of Ezekiel, there's a verse in chapter number 20, and it says, beginning with verse number 34, I shall bring you out of the peoples, gather you out of the lands where you were scattered, with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out. And I shall bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and shall enter into judgment with you face to face there. As I entered into judgment with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Mitzrayim, so I shall enter into judgment with you, declares Yahweh, the Master Yahweh. And I shall make you pass under the rod, and I shall bring you into the bond of the covenant. Now listen to verse 38. And purge the rebels from among you, and those who transgress against me. From the land where they sojourn, I bring them out, but they shall not come into the land of Israel, and you shall know that I am Yahweh. Listen to what he's saying there. In that day when he gathers us out of the nations, and he brings us toward the land of Israel, we make a pit stop in the wilderness, and there he begins to determine by separation, by counting us under the rod. As sheep pass under the rod, the shepherd counts them. We're going to be counted. And when he finds rebels in the midst of us, rebels who were brought out, rebels who made step one, made the first cut, they don't make the final cut. And they're not brought into the land. That's serious thinking, folks. Something maybe we need to ponder today. ponder on that, and I'll hope to see you again tomorrow. Then shalom.